Christy, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using the Sweet November Stamps Aloha Wheeze. So I have stamped those images out on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Extreme Black Hybrid ink, and I'm going to be coloring with my Copic markers. So I've taken some removable adhesive and attached my cardstock panel to a slightly larger one so that I can color off the edges without that getting all over my work surface, because I am going to be coloring this entire card front with Copic markers. So this is going to be quite Copic heavy, but I hope you guys are here for it. I haven't done one of these completely Copic colored cards in quite a while, and I do really enjoy them. So I am starting with the sand at the bottom of the scene, and I am using some E50 markers to lay that in. I'm using E50, E51, E53, and E55. And I'm taking that darkest color first, that E55, and just adding in a few little areas where I want there to be some darker patches, either some shadow or just some kind of little ripples or whatever in the sand. So I did that first, and then the top line is where I decided that I wanted my sand to end. So I'm going to try to split this into sand, sea, and sky. But obviously I'm just going to do that with my Copics because there's no lines to go by. So I'm just kind of drawing that in for myself. Once I have that E55 laid in, I'm going to start to blend that out with the E53. And again, just using those long strokes. And that is going to help me lay down color quickly and really help blend everything out. I'm going to move to my next shade, which is the E51, and just continue those patches, expanding them out, still leaving plenty of white space for my highlight. So I'm just continuing that and mainly concentrating those darker areas where there are some natural shadows. So we have some coconut palms there, putting some shadows at the bases, putting shadows under these little kiddos. Also, those two little coconuts in the sand, which originally I thought were rocks, but I realized as I was coloring them in that they are actually coconuts. They have the three little circles there on them, so it kind of indicates the top of a coconut. But anyway, I'm going to finish all of those highlighted areas where I want the lighter spots to be with the E50. And this is just my base layer to kind of figure out where I wanted everything to go. I am going to darken this up. In fact, I'm even going to bring in one shade darker of a marker, E57. I wanted things to just be a little bit more vibrant, and I also realized that my lines were not completely straight, so this is where I'm going to fix any of that on this second layer. Just going in and deepening the shadows where I want them, and then just correcting that horizon line a little bit more with a few extra little strokes there. So I'm being very sparing with the E57. I don't want too much of that in there, just a little bit here and there to add some extra depth. It's really going to make those highlighted areas pop even more as well, because there'll be more of a contrast between those darkest darks and the lightest lights. So I'm just working my way back down in the reverse once again, using that E55 next, and straightening out that line at the top, like I said, and then just doing those long thin strokes and smoothing everything out. So this background did take a little while to color, but I was enjoying myself so much. I really love Copic coloring. I've told you guys in the past, it's like almost like therapy to me. I can really get in the zone when I have something like this where I can just kind of go to town. And I just had an audiobook on and was having the time of my life, honestly. So yeah, I also want to mention that I am not an expert at these backgrounds. This is something that is still fairly new to me. I've only done a few of these backgrounds. I've been coloring with Copics for over a decade, but I don't often do these full-scale backgrounds with Copics, and it's been a while since I did my last one. So, you know, I'm learning and it's not going to be perfect, but that's okay. I think it's important to try, and, you know, that's the only way you're going to get better at anything, is to just keep trying and see what you like and what you don't and how you might want to change that in the future. So, yeah, I was just having a good time here, and if it's not perfect, I think that's totally fine. It's not supposed to be perfect. It's a handmade card. So I'm going to do one more thing here to add some extra detail that I think is going to really help this sand come to life, and that is a little bit of dot detail. I'm not going to put it everywhere, just mainly in those darkest shadowed areas, and just using a couple of the darkest markers. So I'm starting with that E57, just adding a few little dots here and there to kind of indicate some kernels of sand. And I'm being really careful that the ones I'm doing that are supposed to be further back in the scene are a little bit smaller so that it looks like there's some depth there. So once I did that with the E57, I'm also going to add in a few with the E55. Just kind of scattering those here and there under their feet and around those palms. And I think if you put it everywhere, it would get a little bit too much, but just choosing a few spots here and there, I think that really helps add a lot to the scene. I am going to add just a few more with that E53, and that's going to be the last shade that I use. Like I said, I don't want to get too heavy-handed, but this will dry back a little bit as well, so it'll fade into that background a little bit more. Next up, I'm going to tackle the water, and I'm using some BG shades. I'm using BG32, BG34, BG45, and BG49. And honestly, this was the part of the card that I was the most nervous about. I've done some Copic beachy scenes before with water, but they had some stamped lines there. I've never kind of just gone for it without any indication of where the water should end or like where I should put these darker patches. I'm kind of doing it the same way that I did the sand to try to indicate little ripples and waves in the water. But I think this is definitely an area that I need to continue to work on and just practice and get a little bit better at. I wish that I had left some of the white spaces between the waves to be little crests of the waves with the, you know, the foamy tops, and I did not do that. And but you know what? There's so many stamps in this set that I could definitely create a few more cards and just continue to practice that and see how it looks the best and just learn from trying different things. So I started with that BG49 and laid in those darkest little areas and blended that out with the BG45. Now I'm coming in with that BG34 and softening that even further. I really like how this is creating those different little areas in the water where there's parts that are a little more blue, parts that are a little bit more green. It really looks like the Caribbean to me, which is my favorite place to be just about on Earth. So it really took me back to some of my travels. I have not been to Hawaii yet. We were actually planning on going for our 20th anniversary, and we were married in the year 2000. So you guys can kind of do the math and figure out what happened there. But anyway, we are now planning on going for our 25th, which will be in 2025. So yeah, I'm very, very excited. It's been a dream of mine since I was about 12 years old to go to Hawaii. So very, very excited to live out that dream someday soon. But for now, I absolutely loved going there with this card and just kind of imagining what it would be like to really be there. So just like I did with the sand, I wanted to darken up the water, and I also wanted to add a little bit more of a darker blue to create some little areas of depth. You know, the ocean isn't flat. There are little areas where it gets darker and lighter, and you know, especially in the Caribbean, you see that as you're looking out over the water. There's these little darker patches, and I really wanted to add that into the scene to imitate that look that I love with all of those different blues. So I'm going to blend that back out with the BG49 and just continue my way back down in the reverse. And while I do that, I just wanted to talk really quickly about Sweet November Stamps. It is a company that is owned by my friend Amy Young. She is an incredible Copic colorist, absolutely one of my idols. And she's also a very talented illustrator, and these little wee folk that she does are some of my most favorite of her images. So when she invited me to join this little hop that we're doing, this was the set that I just fell in love with instantly. And I'll talk more about that hop in just a minute. There's some giveaways and all kinds of stuff that you're going to want to stay tuned for. So I'm moving on to the sky now, and I pulled out more markers than I ended up using. So I've got out B00, B41, B52, and B45. I'm not going to end up using all of those. I ended up deciding to just start with that B00 and see how that went. So I'm doing more flicking in from the sides, similar to how I did the sand and the water, using a bit longer strokes here now just to kind of break up that sky. And this time I am going to leave some white spaces to indicate some clouds. And I was already happy with how dark that was. I am going to take it a little bit darker, but I actually wanted to soften it first. So I brought in B000 and started to flick that out as well, kind of softening up some of those areas. And that way I could make sure that I can leave some of those white spaces so it can just look like nice wispy clouds on a bright summer day. Then I'm going to move to that B41, and I'm going to start adding in a few little areas of a little bit darker color, putting that in where the B00 is, just adding a few little extra streaks. I really love the tone of the B41. It almost has like a touch of a periwinkle in it, which is another color that I absolutely love, and I just think it's fun to create that little bit of contrast in there by having those varying little blues, and also it just ties it in with the rest of the scene. So I'm working back down in the reverse now using the B00, and I think I also added in a little of that B000, and that's as dark as I went. I ended up not going any darker with the other two shades there. And you can see that I'm coloring right over some of the palm trees and leaves. Because these blues are so pale and the colors that I'm going to put over them were much darker, it really was fine to do this. I will take my colorless blender and just clean up a little bit there. So I'm just kind of pushing that ink back out of the lines, but I didn't work too hard at it because, like I said, I knew that the colors I was going to use over top were going to cover that up. But I just wanted to show you that it is so much easier to do the background first so that you can get those long strokes. If I would have colored the images first and the background after, I would have really risked dragging those darker colors all throughout that background when I was trying to color that in. So it was just much easier to do it this way and then just clean up any little areas that you need to before you color those in. So I'm moving on to my palm trees, and I'm going to use E42, E43, E44, and E47, and I am putting that darkest shade, the E47, on the inside edge. Each of these palm trees is bowing toward the center, so the place where it is curved, in is going to be the place where the sun would not hit as much, so that's why that is where I put my shadow, and then the highlight is on the outer side. I did use all 4 of those colors, just a little sliver of that E42 to add some extra highlight. And then I'm going to color those little stripes on the palm tree with just the darkest 3 shades to create a little bit of extra contrast. I don't think you have to color these in, but I just thought it would be fun to add a little extra detail to those. So that's what I went ahead and did. So as I mentioned, this is for the Sweet November new release hop, and they are giving away the entire release. So not just this stamp set, which is huge. You saw that at the beginning, but there's also a whole bunch of other ones. There's princesses and unicorns, Pegasuses, dragons, there's girls dressed for the beach, there's a birthday set, all different types of images and all different types of styles. So to enter to win, all you have to do is like, follow, and comment on all of the participants' posts and videos. And there's only a few of us, so it's not like it's going to be too overwhelming, but even so, you have some time. So you want to have that done by Tuesday the 20th. And then Wednesday, the 21st of June, the Sweet November will choose a random winner. And I will have a link to my blog post in the description box down below, and then all of that information will be over there as well. So I did add in the E49 to color in my coconuts, and then I ended with the E43, so just left off the E42 in that combo. And I did not realize at this point that those coconuts in the sand were coconuts, so I will come back to those in a little bit. But I'm moving on to the leaves of my palms, and I'm using YG13, YG17, and G28. Wanted to throw that G28 into the mix with those YGs because it just adds so much depth. So I'm placing that kind of where the line is drawn down the center of each of those little palm fronds, and then out a little bit, and then I'm going to blend on either side of that with the YG17 and just save some room on either side around the edges for the highlight. I'm leaving a little bit more room down on the kind of torn edges, I guess you could say, the little edges that have the little notches in them. That's where I'm going to place the YG13, and then on some of them I also left a little bit of room for that YG13 at the top. It really just depended on if that palm frond was overlapped by another one or not, so it would have been in more shadow. So I just kind of did it on a few of them, but yeah. So I'm going to do the other palm tree exactly the same, going back to that G28, laying in that shadow right on the line there, and then a little bit more on the center area right near the coconuts. I figured those would be casting a little bit of a shadow as well, so I put a little extra depth right there. And once I have that laid in, I'll start to blend out with the mid-tone, the YG17. Taking that color carefully out and leaving a little sliver for the YG13 on the top when I can, and then a little more on the bottom edge, just like on the other tree. One thing I love about doing these fully Copic colored cards is just seeing them come to life. I mean, you start with just a couple of stamped images on a blank piece of cardstock, and little by little you chip away at all of that white space, and eventually it just becomes a really stunning scene. I think it's really, really fun to do, and like I said, no matter your skill level, I'm no expert at these backgrounds, but it's just so much fun to try and to learn and grow as you do, you know. That's the only way to do it, is just to practice and try new things and keep at it, you know. Don't get discouraged. Don't compare yourself to other people. Just kind of do you and strive to do better than you did the last time. So I decided to just use the same greens that I have been for the other little leaves around their ankles and also on his little leaf crown. So I'm starting with that G28 again and added a little tiny dot of color to the center of each of those leaves. And then I blended that out with the YG17 and added a little of that YG13 as well. They are going to be a little bit darker just because they're so much smaller, so that color is more concentrated. And then for his leaf crown, I'm going to do the same thing. You can kind of see it a little bit better there because they're slightly larger, but just adding a little line down the center where the artist has drawn the line for me, and then blending out with the other shades. Now for the crown, I did decide to add in a fourth shade. I just wanted it to look slightly different since it's close to that palm leaf. I just wanted to lighten it up a bit, give it a bit extra contrast. So I pulled in the YG11 for that. And then I'll use all 4 of these shades for the grass skirts. Now these little grass skirts I think would also be cute colored in some brown tones, but since the sand is right behind them and there's so much brown there, I wanted them to be green because I wanted that pop of color on there, that bit of richness and freshness in the center of the card. So that's what I did, but I think it would be fun to do them, in different ways. So just adding in a little of that YG11 down on the bottom edge to lighten that up a bit. I kept those greens out because I wanted to do something else with them, and started to color in those coconuts with some gray tones. Like I said, I first thought that they were stones until I had a better look at them and realized that they were coconuts. And so instead I just colored over them with the exact same shades that I had used on the coconuts above. So I tried to keep the darker parts just to a minimal because I didn't want them to be too dark there, but I just used those same 4 shades to fill those in. So then I wanted to add just a few little grasses kind of poking up here and there. So I'm taking that G28 and using the very tip of my marker and doing some quick little strokes there, and just a few here and there, not a ton. I decided to add some longer ones in there, and then that one kind of got away from me, but I decided to just embrace it. It would have been hard to fix it at that point. So I'm just going to kind of continue. I'm switching now to the YG17 and adding a few more of this lighter shade in there and trying to add a few little longer strokes mixed in as well so that one doesn't look completely out of place. But yeah, just those 2 shades for the grasses. And now I'm finally ready to move on to these little kiddos. So for their skin, I'm going to use E00, E95, E97, and E99. Starting with the E99 and laying in some shadows on the girl first. I'm just going to do one at a time. And then I'm going to start to blend that out with the E97. Just pulling that color out a bit and still leaving lots of area for the highlights. Since this is more of a sunny scene, I figured there would be lots of little highlights there. I'm going to use the E95 to bring that color up even further, kind of softening that a bit. I did fill in her midriff with the E95 and most of her feet as well, since her legs are under that skirt and that would be casting a shadow. I just left a little bit of white space on her toes for that E000, and then also filled in her upper arm and the lower part of her face. And I'm going to use the same for the boy. I went back and forth on several different combos. This is a new skin tone combo for me, and I really like how it turned out. The reason I ended up going with this one because it had a little bit of more of like a reddish undertone, kind of like a rusty shade that really looked sun-kissed to me, like people that had spent a lot of time out in the sun and maybe had like a fresh little bit of sunburn or something like that. I just liked that little bit of the reddish tone in the brown combo. So that's why I went with this one, but there are lots of options. So if you'd like to see me color these little kids in like a different skin tone, let me know. There's a few other kids in this set, so I could definitely do another card and try some of the other ones out. But for this card, I really liked how that turned out. I wanted something that was very different from the other browns in the scene, so I think this worked well for that. For the girl's hair, I am trying also a brand new to me combo. I wanted her hair to look so black that it's almost like blue. So I'm going to add in a BV shade. I'm using C3, BV08, and C9. So I am using that C9 first to lay in the darkest little parts there where I want there to be the low lights. And then I'm going to use that BV08 and pull that color a little bit closer together, adding in some of those extra strokes, still leaving some white space for the highlight, and just using the very tip of my marker so I can get those really thin little areas. And then I'll go in with that C3 and kind of fill in any remaining white spaces. Now I ended up looking a little bit gray, so I am going to go back in with more of that C9 and darken things up a bit. Now that I've got my first layer down, I can kind of see where I need to darken things up. And then I'm going to add a little bit more of that BV08 in there as well, and then the C3. And I really do like how it turned out. It was really different, but I think it turned out fun. And then for the boy, I decided to go in a completely different direction. I made him a blonde, kind of like a dirty blonde. So I went with YR21, YR23, and then a little E57 to add some depth in there. So I started with the YR21, and since his hair is kind of spiky, kind of windblown like that, I'm just adding in the strokes that kind of mimic the way that it's drawn. I'm going to add a little bit extra of the darker color to the parts that are underneath on the sides of his head and then back by his neck. But I will add extra little blonde tips to the area that is framing his face. And I did that with the YR21. So really quick and easy for him, and I think it turned out really cute. I did want to add some rosy cheeks to them, so I went with RV10 and RV11. Used a little RV11 first and blended out with the RV10. I'm also going to fill in the girl's mouth with that RV11. Then I added in RV13 and RV14, and I'm going to do the hibiscus flower that is tucked over her ear. And also she's got a lei on, and I decided to make that floral. You can't really tell much because she's got her arms crossed over it, but I just decided to do it as flowers because I thought it would be pretty to have little extra pops of pink. For the hibiscus, I put the pink on the outer edges, left the center white, and then did the stamen with Y13. I'm also going to do his little shell necklace with the Y13, and I'll add in a touch of Y15 to those as well. And then I also did her little tube top with those two shades. I used the Y15 first, blended out with the Y13, and added a little extra of the Y15. For the guitar, I decided to go with E30s. Like I said, I wanted to use different browns than I had previously used on this card, so I pulled out a whole range from E30, E31, E33, E35, E37, and E39. And I'm going to do kind of like a two-tone look. I'm doing the neck area and the inner portion. Sorry, I cannot remember the parts of a guitar. But anyway, I did those with the darkest three shades, and then for the front of the guitar, I'm going to use the lightest three shades. So just filling that in quickly, little E30 up at the top for a highlight, and then I'm going to peel this off. I'm going to trim that out with one of the Lawn Fawn outside in stitch rectangle stackables to just trim down a tiny sliver and also add that nice stitching detail to the outer edges. And then I'm going to stamp my sentiment. So the sentiment that comes with this set is Aloha. I'm going to stamp that in VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I'm using my Twiddler's Neck Pressure Pal to make sure I get even coverage because it's that nice bold sentiment. And I will stamp that down a second time as well. And then I will set that aside to dry. And in the meantime, I'm going to do an insert for the rest of my card. And I'm using one of the other Sweet November stamp sets from, I believe it was last summer's release. It's called a Fairwee Summer Picnic Expansion Pack. And I chose a sentiment from that. And then the little parrot dancing on the drum is from the Aloha Wheeze. So I stamped that in Lawn Fawn Peacock ink, and now I am ready to assemble this card. I've made a card base out of Lawn Fawn Rainforest cardstock, and I'm going to glue the insert to the inside there. I just use that same die so we have that nice border of cardstock on the outside edges, and I'm going to do the same with the focal panel. I think that color really pops nicely with the turquoises in the water. So I'm just making sure that's on there nice and straight, and then I can smooth that into place. And then I just wanted to add in a little bit of Stardust Stickles. So I'm going to actually add it to the waters. I thought it might be nice to have some sparkly waves, so I'm just smearing out a little bit on all of those darkest blue areas and then using the nozzle to kind of spread that around and just create like a nice thin little layer of sparkle there. I think that's going to be really pretty when this card is tipped in the light. I also just wanted to add a little bit to the center of the hibiscus flower in her hair, and I put it on the little parts of her lei that you could see. I almost put it on him, but then I decided maybe the boy wouldn't want to be sparkly, so I just decided to call that good, and there you can see all of that little shine, and there's another peek at the inside. I know this was a longer video, but I really do hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please go ahead and hit that like button to let me know. You can also leave me a comment down below. Don't forget to check out my blog post as well for all of the participants in the hop so that you can be entered to win the giveaway. And I also invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. Click that notification bell if you always want to be alerted when I post a new video. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today, and I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.